Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Live from New Amsterdam. This is a monthly series of conversations about New Netherland, the Dutch colony that preceded and gave rise to New York, and its capital city of New Amsterdam. It is brought to you by the New York Historical and by the New Netherland Institute. My name is Russell Shorto. I am the director of the New Amsterdam Project at the New York Historical, and I'm also a senior scholar at the New Netherland Institute. And my guest today, I am happy to say, where is she? There she is, Allyson Schettino. Welcome, Allyson. She is the Director of Curriculum and Instruction at the New York Historical, where she oversees curriculum, writing, and teacher professional development. Allyson has developed and led hundreds of student programs since 2008. She's the author of Where Are the Women? Promoting Inclusion in Survey History Courses, which was published in the American Historian, and a frequent contributor to national history and social studies conferences. Welcome, Allyson.
I'm so happy to be here today.
I've for years, whenever I give talks about New Netherland and New Amsterdam, someone invariably asks me, and about the importance, arguing that this is important to New York history, to American history, someone invariably asks me, is this being taught in schools? The answer is yes, and you are one of the main people who are responsible for that. So go ahead, you can jump in right there if you want.
Sure. Well, I was going to say, I don't know that I'm responsible for it. I didn't write the New York State standards, but I am trying to improve the teaching and learning
Okay.
for
Okay.
New Amsterdam history.
So what are the components of the New Netherland curriculum material that New York Historical has available?
So we have a bunch of different pieces available that actually go all the way back. We started producing materials to help teach this history back in 2004, but our more current and up-to-date materials are our New World, New Netherland, New York, which is a dedicated curriculum guide specifically about New Netherland, from the early explorers who came and checked out the area all the way through to how the Dutch adjusted after English colonial takeover. We also have in our Women in the American Story curriculum, which is an online resource that covers all of American history from first contact all the way through to 2001. We have a dedicated section about life in the Dutch colonies and what were women up to. And that was just updated just this last year. And then we have a video series that we also launched this year with really generous support from the Dutch consulate, called New Amsterdam at 400. And it's a 5 video series. They're like 3 to 5 minutes each on topics that will help teachers make sure their students are getting the most up-to-date info on the subject.
That's great. And so that maybe you just answered my next question. Who are these materials for? They're for teachers mainly?
So they are mainly for students, and then they come with a lot of guiding materials to help the teachers be able to use them in the classroom. So I create what we call student-facing resources, and that might be primary sources that have been translated and then modern English transcribed, so the students can see the original Old Dutch, they can see a translation of that Old Dutch, and then in case that's difficult for emerging readers, they can also get a sense of what that says, so they can go back to the text and understand how it says it. So we do primary sources, we have paintings, we have objects. We also write short biographies we call life stories. And so those are all the student facing things. And then for teachers, we have background essays that help explain the context of all the materials, as well as suggested activities that they can do with students and things that help them figure out how to build lessons by connecting these materials.
I should say to people that this is a 30-minute conversation. We'll talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for you all, anybody who has questions, to chime in, and you can do that by typing into the chat. What level are they targeted for? Different levels?
So we specifically target our stuff towards a middle school audience. And when I say target, what I mean is we use these Lexile analyzers that help us figure out about what reading level the materials we're producing is. And we have found that that is then really useful across grade bands because teachers who are working with younger students can pick and choose stuff that either is visual, or they can just cut down the text that we've included. And then teachers who are doing high school level things can just take their explorations farther. So middle school has been our sweet spot, but we know it's used across all grades.
Yeah. Can you give an example of a primary source document in New York Historical's collection that is a basis for study?
Yeah. So one of my favorites is we have a property deed from Peter Stuyvesant to Manuel de España, at least that's his name in the records. And he was a formerly enslaved person. So he was probably one of the earliest people who were brought to the colony and enslaved, was one of the earliest to sue for their emancipation, or not sue, but petition for their emancipation in New Amsterdam. He was granted it. And then the colonial government understood that if these emancipated people were going to survive, they needed the means to do so. And so there are records of various land grants. We have them in maps, we have them in other things. But this is actually the original document signed by Peter Stuyvesant that says, hey, Manuel, this is the land we're giving you. It's for you to support your family, and then your children will support themselves, and so on and so forth, etc. And that's just incredibly remarkable for use with students in a variety of ways. It helps demonstrate the diversity of people who are living in New Amsterdam. It helps demonstrate what was necessary for a person to be able to survive and thrive in New Amsterdam. It also helps tell the story of enslavement and freedom in New Amsterdam. Like, we can just touch on so many different really fascinating topics.
Yeah, that is a great document, which, by the way, we had in our exhibit last year, New York before
Yes.
New York. It's and it confounds people because, you can petition for freedom, and what did that mean, and what were the conditions of it, which is an interesting part of it.
Mhm.
Okay, you use paintings as well, yes?
We do, yeah. So a good example of that is one of my jobs in preparing materials for teachers is not necessarily to go out and tell teachers this is what you should be teaching, because teachers are already getting that from everyone under the sun all of the time, but rather to look at what are the standards teachers are supposed to be meeting, whether that's local or state or federal, and then figure out ways that we can use our collections to enrich what they're doing with students. So an example that I love to share is we know across the country, everybody has to teach about colonial trade. What are the colonies for? Why are European nations interested in founding these colonies? What are they getting out of it, et cetera? And so for our Women in the American Story curriculum, we thought that was a really easy and interesting place to just insert the fact that women exist. And so instead of the traditional, portrait, or not portrait, but still life of all of the bounties of the colonies, we use one of Vermeer's portraits. It's of a young Dutch serving woman. She's standing by a window. She's holding a silver pitcher, but everything about every item in the painting represents a different part of the Dutch colonial empire. So you have the linen that's coming from the New World, the silver that's coming from South America, the dye that's coming from India, the rugs that are coming from the Turkish region. All of this stuff is still in the image. So it helps to, what we recommend teachers do is use this picture, chop it all up, cut up all the pieces, and put
Hmm.
all of the pieces all over a map, and let your
Oh, that's
students
great.
really
Wow.
understand the expanse of Dutch colonization.
That's really great. So, and then they've got a geography lesson there
They've
as
got a
well as
geography lesson, a history lesson, a trade lesson, and they've had to admit women were there too.
right. And women are central to the
Yeah.
story. Okay, so then you use objects in kind of a compare and contrast way.
Absolutely. So a good example of that is in our women's history curriculum, we have a set of resources. It's a photograph of an Oneida cradle board and a photograph of a Dutch loopwagen. And both are items that were used in
You're going to
this
explain what each of those are, right?
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Both are items that are used in the Dutch colonial period specifically for childcare. So, a cradle board is a long, flat board and it's got a hoop around the front and a little basically a footrest, and it's a thing that you can lay a baby on, and then you can wrap them in cloth, you can wear them on your back, you can prop them up against the wall, you can carry them with you while you're doing work. Similar to today's ergo babies, if anybody out there has small kids and has been wearing those recently, but it was a form of baby wearing, but it keeps the child safe, secure, and nearby. The Loopwagen is basically a proto baby walker today. It doesn't have nearly the same safety considerations, but it's a wooden structure that you can like lower a small child who's learning to walk in, and they can sort of toddle around on their own. And we compare and contrast these because they tell really interesting stories about what women are up against in this period in the Americas, that they have a lot of really important responsibilities to help keep their families alive and thriving and functioning, cooking and cleaning and harvesting and pickling and all of that sort of stuff. They are also the sole caregivers of small children. And so they had to find ways to keep the children safe, keep the children occupied, keep the children out of harm's way, and still be able to do the rest of their work.
And I imagine kids find that really interesting.
Yeah.
And something that brings to mind is that, I mean, people often think of the European settlers and the native people as like these two vastly different worlds, which in many ways they were. But there are also many ways in which they were alike, partly because they're all people who have babies to care for and things like that. And what I found striking when we did the exhibit on based around the Costello Plan, which is a map of New Amsterdam in the 17th century, which has a wall around it and these neat little houses in it, comparing that with longhouse villages, where you have
Mhm.
these kind of orderly houses in it and a wall or kind of a enclosure around it, and it gives a sense that there are similarities there too.
I mean, they're all neighbors. And I think that's one of the things that I've really learned, since I was taught when I was in fourth grade and did my Dutch New
Mm.
York stuff. I think one of the things that's really come out in the archive since then, as people are studying, is how integrated these two worlds were. That the Dutch really relied on the trade that was happening with Indigenous people, and were really interested in cultivating that trade and that relationship. And so there was just all sorts of interconnection happening at all times, sometimes friendly, sometimes not, but always an exchange going on. We have some documents in both of the curriculum that I mentioned. About people who become translators to help the Dutch colonial government be able to talk to various Indigenous communities all the way up the Hudson River to Albany. And some of them end up being women. And, one of the things I thought was really interesting was it likely ends up being women because on the day to day and going to markets and trading, small goods and vegetables and that kind of stuff, women were probably having more close contact with Indigenous women than maybe men were in their day to day work that was going on around them. And so you get these women who become fluent in different languages and then are being recognized by the Dutch government. And that's Indigenous women and colonial women. It's both.
Yeah. And you have something on Sarah Kierstead?
Yes, we do. Yep. Sarah Kirstead is one. And there's another, and I'm going to forget her name, but there's a Mohawk woman up
Oh.
in the Albany region that we have something on too now.
Yeah, and one thing I learned in putting together the New York Before New York exhibit, we did a virtual Costello plan that you can click on
Mhm.
links, and one was her house, which in New Amsterdam. And I realized in working on this with a number of people that late in the life of the Dutch colony, there was a trading post, like a kind of covered a trade post that was built for specifically where the native people would come and trade. And it was right in front of her house, which makes
Mhm.
total sense because she was the translator, and it's
Exactly.
somehow uh, working with with the geography, you
Mhm.
notice things that you wouldn't if you're just working with documents.
100%. And I think, one of the things that sort of comes out is, at least when I was growing up and in school, colonies were presented as planned things like, oh, the pilgrims came over and they had this vision and they carried out this vision. The Dutch came over and they built their plantations and they had their oh my God, I'm thinking of the word Knickerbockers because that was the name of our arena up in Albany at the time. But they had, these guys who came over and they had a vision and they were cultivating the land. I think what you realize as you start digging deeper, and especially into things like the geography, is how organic this was. That these are people in conversation with their surroundings and in conversation with the indigenous communities that already live there. And the way things are developing is not quite as top down, this is what's going to work and this is our vision, as maybe it had been presented at least to me when I was a child.
Yeah, so I mean, you see it evolving. People
Hmm.
realize, oh, we need a trading post where we can
Hmm.
conduct regular trade and things.
Exactly, and we're going to put it in front of this woman's house because she's the one that can help.
Right, right. So just once again, if you have questions, please type them in and we'll get to them in a moment. So what are these life stories, this secondary source that you come up with that you develop for educational purposes?
So these are an attempt to help students understand the lived reality of different people. And in the case of our Dutch stuff, how, what's the word for it? How diverse that lived reality could be. Um, and like that they're short enough. I mean, there's a lot of really great, wonderful resources out there about people and their lived experiences, but kids have certain reading attention spans and certain, language stuff they have to get through. I think this is not related to Dutch New Amsterdam, but the hardest thing I've ever done was try to take David Blight's biography of Frederick Douglass and get it down to 2 or 3 pages. Frederick Douglass. Like that's the kind of work that we're trying to do. Capture the essence of who a person was and what their lived experience was, and also why does that matter.
Mm.
And we cover, the main people. We've got Peter Stuyvesant, but we all and Keft and some of the others, but we also try to cover as best as we can regular folks. We have I want to pull up some names while we're sort of chatting about it so I don't mislead you all. Um, for example, we have Margaretha van Verik, who I know has become pretty famous in New Amsterdam studies, but for all intents and purposes was just a regular woman who happened to be married to a church leader, and thank goodness, left behind a will that gives us not only a sense of what kind of life she was leading, but also what kind of trade was possible for a
Mhm.
connected person in this colony. We have a life story of a young girl named Lisbeth. I want to make sure Lisbeth Antoniussen. I came to her through Susanna Romney's work, and she's a young free Black woman who is born into the colony and then ends up being enslaved as punishment for crimes she may or may not have committed. And so her story, and one of the things Romney sort of posits is this severe punishment may have been because by that point in her life she was orphaned and nobody was quite sure exactly what to do with her. And so, her life story helps us talk about what is slavery and what is freedom, and how tenuous those differences could be in the colony. We also have Quashwam, who was a Montaukett leader out on Long Island, and she is doing everything she can to sort of play the Dutch and the English off of each other in order to secure land rights for her people. So, stories like that just sort of hit on really important things that are happening in the colonies, but from a personal perspective, because the thing kids love most is the personal and being able to sort of understand motivation.
And using things like a will. I mean,
Mhm.
kids probably haven't seen a will before at all. And yet here's
Exactly.
one that was written 300 or 350 years ago.
Exactly.
And the idea that you have to sit and think about who you're going to give your things to after you die.
Exactly.
Um, so, how do you get this material to teachers? How do they know about it?
It weirdly enough is mostly just grassroots, going out to conferences, holding workshops, meeting with teachers where they're at and talking them through what it is that we do. So the workshops we hold, which are free and open to the public. So if people, they're not all about New Amsterdam, but if you're interested in learning more about New York Historical Society's teacher workshops, I recommend checking one out. But they are every Wednesday on Zoom, 6 to 7 p.m. They're completely free. And we pick a historical topic. We use some of our curriculum materials. We demonstrate a little bit of what we like to do, but we also send people off to talk to each other and share, oh, this is what I'm doing in the classroom, etc. It's a lot about trying to build communities for people who care deeply about the teaching and learning of history, because unfortunately, there's not a lot of support for that out in the world right now.
And you've got a team who does this.
I do, yeah. So I am the head of what we call the instruction and learning team. And I have four full-time people who just do teacher programs locally, nationally. They run our open enrollment, and then one who oversees the creation and production of all of our curriculum materials. And then I have two other full-time team members who specifically run programs that we do for green card holders on their road to citizenship. We help teach them American history.
Uh-huh. We've got a couple questions here, if I can pull this up. Not showing up. Do you think there is a growing interest in Dutch colonial history in U.S. schools? Do you imagine that growing in the future?
I think that I don't know if it's growing in New York State. I think there's just a really strong New York State commitment to talking about this history. And I think is growing is a sense of, oh, this makes us special. That the Dutch colonies are really unique and different from the English colonies. And that sets New York on its own slightly different course than what the other how the other colonies are going to develop, and then what kind of states they become later. And so I think there's a growing appreciation for that. I will say we do run into some trouble once we get outside of the New York State area. When I go and I travel, out to Minnesota, and I'm like, and the Dutch colonies, they're like, that's fantastic. I only want to hear about French stuff. I'm like, fair enough. They were your colonial area. But one of the things our curriculums do, even if you're looking at the French colony stuff, under the suggested activities, we're going to invite you to compare and contrast. So this is what's happening with laws governing enslavement in France. Why don't you compare it to the Dutch? Why don't you compare it to the English? And then you'll have a better understanding of, so when this place became a nation, people were coming out that particular subject with all different viewpoints inherited from their different colonial empires. Is that part of what's creating the confusion over what to do next as a nation? So we raise those kind of questions.
Yeah, but you told when we were talking the other day, you
Yeah.
told me you brought up Kentucky, for example. I mean, so
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's interest in other states in this
Oh,
history.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We lead these professional developments all over, and we share this history all over the
So
place.
what was that briefly, and how did it come about, this Kentucky interest?
So we met it's the Kentucky Educational Development Committee, and we met them at NCSS, one of the national conferences, and they are working on trying to rewrite their lesson materials based on the sort of challenging new state standards.
Mhm.
And one of the things they're really interested in specifically is diversifying their materials. And so we've led a number of workshops with them. We did a whole series with them in the fall. We're now in the midst of a second series with this spring. And over the summer, they're actually bringing a large group of their teachers up to New York, and they're going to do an entire week just dedicated to New York history, starting in the colonies and moving onwards. So yeah, it's really exciting. I think once people are introduced to something beyond just what their local history is, then they're like, wait, I would like to know so much more about this.
Mhm.
And I
And
think
to
Dutch colonial history, because it's not in a lot of textbooks, or at
sure.
least very little of it, is something that people are like, whoa, really?
Right, right. Yeah, no, that's it's so novel to people, a
Yes.
lot of
Yeah.
people. Okay, in studying women in New Amsterdam, who have you found that was a particularly influential woman?
I think one of the ones that really stands out to me right now, and I probably gave you a different answer when we
That's
talked
okay.
about
This
this
was a
the
question from a
other day.
viewer.
Oh, great. Okay. Okay, good. I want to make sure to find her exact name. Just give me 1 second. Catalina Trico.
Sure.
And she really stands out to me because I think she's an example of so many different things. So if you're unfamiliar, Catalina Trico is a very young woman who is a religious refugee in Europe, and she ends up fleeing religious persecution and becomes part of a group. You know, one of the things the Dutch struggled with in the New Amsterdam colony is, why would you move to a place with 4 seasons when you could go to some places where there's one beautiful season all year long? And so they are constantly looking for people who are willing to move to this place and make lives. And Catalina gets selected as one of these early settlers, and the company arranges for her to marry a gentleman. They get married the day before they hop on the ship. They come overseas, and then they're part of that original, first we're going to scatter. They get sent up to near the Albany area, where some other people from their same ship are sent into the Hudson Valley, etc. And then they're part of the, oops, I think we need to consolidate. Things didn't go particularly well with local indigenous populations in the Albany area, so she has to move down. But having started as a religious refugee, as a person who really had no power and maybe even no prospects back in Europe, she and her husband become really well respected members of the community. They have a ton of kids. And a thing I love to share with students is, today historians estimate she may have as many as 1 million descendants in the larger New York City metro area. So this
She was
person who
influential in the long,
she
long
was
scheme of things.
influential in so many ways. But I think that really speaks to, yeah, it's a very small settlement compared to some of the others, but the impacts are so huge and still ongoing.
Apparently I'm getting this message from Sarah, our producer. Someone was in a Zoom recently with a descendant of Catalina's last child. Yeah, the interesting thing about her is she had 11 children, and all of those children grew to have children, which was unusual at the time.
Very unusual. So she
Uh,
must have been just a top-notch housekeeper and mother.
Here's another question from a viewer. How did women in New Amsterdam learn?
Oh, interesting question. I'm gonna poke back, and I hope that they learn. What do you mean?
Uh, well, there was a school. They
Yes, there is a
learned to
school.
read and write.
Learn to read and
Came
write. So
the
there
answer.
are schools. There's also at-home tutoring that happens, but everyone is learning to the level they need to succeed. Is that correct? I mean, you might know more about this than I do, Russell.
One thing that was unusual about the Dutch system was that girls
Yes,
learned to read just as well as the boys. So
exactly.
yeah. Um, uh, and maybe one more question here.
Sure.
Why does New York Historical develop materials for the Dutch period? It's a necessity.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Well, I think, as I mentioned before, the Dutch tend to be left out of most textbooks
Hmm.
because the vast majority of the country does not have the same geographical ties to their particular story. So they might get a passing mention, but almost every textbook focuses not even on the Spanish and the French, it's almost all English all the time. So we have to provide the materials that teachers can then use to help appropriately tell this story. But I think the other reason we're really dedicated to this, and I will say, New York Historical Society is one of the most pro-education institutions in New York City. They do a lot to make it possible for us to do great work. But I think part of that is an acknowledgement of history is always changing. And so it is not enough to just do the thing one time and then let it exist forever, especially in things like Dutch colonial history. There's a lot of work that's been done in the last 30 years that's turned a lot of what we thought we know on its head. And making sure that students and teachers have that most up-to-date information is really, really important.
We are out of time. I want to
Holy
thank
moly.
you very much. I know it goes fast. Thank you, Allyson Schettino. And I want to thank Sarah Bees and Ryan Lantini for doing the behind the scenes work. And thank you all for joining. Tune in next month. Bye-bye, everyone.